Selling a house with tenants can feel like walking a tightrope. You've got leases, tenant rights, and showings to juggle, not to mention keeping up with the challenge of trying to make sure everyone stays happy while still trying to make a profit. But here's the good news, with the right approach, it's not just manageable, but it can actually work to your advantage. I'm Molly with Cash Out of My Home, and since 2017, we've bought easily over 300 properties. Some were in pristine condition and some needed a little love, but plenty have been tenant occupied. So trust me when I say I've seen it all. As both landlords and homebuyers here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I'm here to give you the inside scoop on how to sell your tenant occupied house in Tennessee. We're going to cover everything from tenant laws to communication and marketing, as well as closing the deal. So whether you're selling your first tenant rental or you're just looking for tips to streamline the process, you're in the right place. So let's dive right in. Okay, so let's start with the foundation, understanding Tennessee landlord-tenant laws. And if you're selling a house with tenants, this is not just a nice to know, it's a must know. Missteps here can slow down your sale and it can cause legal headaches or even strain relationships with your tenants, which none of us actually want. First, let's talk about leases. In Tennessee, your tenants either have a fixed term lease that says it stays in place if the house is sold. The new owner is essentially going to step into your shoes as the landlord when you sell that property if it's on a fixed term lease. Or on the other hand, they're going to have a month-to-month lease. So you have a little bit more flexibility with the month-to-month lease. With month-to-month leases, in most states, you're just required to give them a 30-day written notice. And if you want them to vacate before the sale, do make sure that you give it to them at least 30 days before. And then, of course, there's going to be access to the property. So Tennessee law requires that you do provide at least 24 hours notice before entering the property for showings, inspections, or appraisals, or even if you're just going in there as the landlord. And respecting this rule not only keeps you compliant, but it also shows your tenants that you value their time and privacy, which can go a long way towards cooperation in the end. And here's a tip that I always share with landlords. Pull out your lease agreements before you start doing anything. Look for clauses that could impact the sale, like automatic renewal terms or restrictions on showings. If something seems unclear or tricky, don't hesitate to reach out to a real estate attorney or a property manager to understand your obligations and your tenants' rights a bit better. Trust me, this is one step that you do not want to skip. Moving on to step number 2 of selling your tenant-occupied property. Communicate clearly with your tenants. Now that you've got a handle on the legal side, let's talk about communication. If there's one thing that I've learned from selling and owning tenant-occupied homes, it's that clear and honest communication is truly the glue that holds this process together. The way that you handle this conversation can make or break your property sale. So start by putting yourself in your tenant's shoes if you can. For them, hearing that their home is being sold is really unsettling. So it's important to approach the topic with respect and with transparency. Sit down with them face to face, if possible, if you're local, and explain your plans to them. Let them know why you've decided to sell, what that timeline actually looks like, and how this is going to realistically affect their living situation. The more upfront that you are, the more likely that they're to work with you instead of working against you. And here's something that I want to be real about. Over the year, we've worked with landlords who actually did not want to tell their tenants about the sale of the property. And while we've always been focused on what's in the owner's best interest, and yes, sometimes we have walked through those properties saying that we're checking the HVAC filters or we're doing an insurance inspection, it's really not always the best route. If tenants feel like they're being lied to, they can leave the property in worse condition than you started with. And so, or even potentially refuse to cooperate entirely. So I really think that transparency isn't about just being polite. It's about protecting your investment. And when you're upfront, you can also coordinate a timeline for them to move out, and that if that's actually a part of the deal. So if you're working with a buyer who has a contingency in the contract that they actually want the property to be vacant at the end of closing, delaying that conversation with your tenants can end up holding up your escrow. So a little communication early can save you from scrambling later on, and it can help keep everyone on the same page during the entire process. Now, here's where strategy comes in. If you need their cooperation for showings or inspections, consider trying to sweeten the deal a little bit. You could potentially offer them a rent reduction during the sale period, or even if you have to, cash for keys agreement if they're willing to maybe move out a little bit earlier. So I've personally used this approach several times, and it's really amazing how a small incentive can actually ease up the tension and help speed up that sale process. But it's not about what you say, it's about how you go about saying it. So when you're communicating with your tenant, be clear, be calm, and be professional. They reassure them that their lease and their rights are going to be honored during the whole entire process, and you'll do everything you can to minimize disruptions for their living environment. And make sure that you let them know that you're going to provide them enough advance notice for showings and that you will always respect their privacy at all times. And here's one last tip that I've learned the hard way is make sure that you put absolutely everything in writing, whether it's a move out agreement, a showing schedule, or a confirmation of something that you just discussed. Having things documented protects both you and your tenants at all times. So remember that your tenants want to feel like they're respected, and the more likely they feel like that, the more likely they are to cooperate. And cooperation is going to make all of the difference when it comes to selling a tenant-occupied home. So step 3, decide whether you want to sell it vacant or whether you want to sell it occupied. This is definitely a big step. So deciding whether to sell your property with tenants still in place or deciding to actually get them gone and sell it vacant. Both options do have their pros and cons, but the choice ultimately depends on your goals, your tenants, and also the kind of buyer that you're targeting. So let me break it down for you, and let me throw in a few tips that you may not have actually thought of. Selling the house with the tenants inside. So if your tenants are reliable and they just happen to be paying market rents, selling with those tenants actually inside can be a selling point for investors. So it saves them the time and the hassle of finding a new tenant. And if they can start earning rental income from day one, that's a big advantage for them. And here is an insider tip based off my experience. If you are marketing to investors, make sure that the numbers are easy for them to see up front. You know, ideally, if you can put together a rent roll that shows them the monthly income, the lease terms, and any payment history, that would be great. If your tenants have been long-term and they're dependable, this is going to make your property just that more attractive. But if not all investors are going to actually be tenant friendly, so if your tenants are paying below market value rent, or if they have an inconsistent payment history, that can lower your property's perceived value. So investors are going to calculate their return on investment, and anything that cuts into their cash flow is going to factor into that offer. Another option would be to sell a property vacant. So selling it vacant can open up your buyer pool to not just investors, but owner-occupant buyers as well, people that actually would move into the property and make this house their home. And even if that's house hacking for a duplex, when you are working with the owner-occupant buyer, you obviously will get a higher price, but there is a catch. The property does need to be vacant. So if your tenants are on a fixed term lease, you're going to either need to negotiate that or wait it out until they move out and that lease agreement is actually over. And one strategy that I've used in the past is offering those tenants that cash for keys deal. Essentially, you're going to pay them upfront early and you're going to ask them to move out before their lease ends. But if you do this, you can avoid delays and potentially damaging your relationship with the tenants. And once again, just make sure that you have everything in writing and that you follow through with what you say. It's all about building trust here with your tenants. So here's another insider tip. If your buyer has a contingency for their property to be vacant and you're working on a tight timeline, do not wait to start the process. Please, please, please coordinate with your tenants early to avoid any escrow delays. I have literally seen deals blow up because sellers underestimated how long it takes for tenants to actually transition from the property. Please do not let them fool you. Their timeline is not what they always say. And here's a hybrid approach. Now, here's something that most people do overlook. You don't always have to choose between tenants, or a vacant property. A hybrid approach can work too. So let's say that you've got multiple units at a 4-unit property. You can work to vacate one of the units while keeping tenants in the other. And this can allow you to potentially clean up one of the units, update it, maybe even stage it. And this can appeal to those owner occupant buyers and also to potential rental investors as well. So before you're making your decision, you should ask yourself these questions. Are your tenants reliable and cooperative? Are they willing to negotiate or potentially vacate early if needed? Is your target buyer going to be an investor, or is it going to be an owner occupant? Or how will this decision impact your timeline and overall profit? At the end of the day, both options do have their advantages, and the right choice is going to depend on your unique situation as always. But if you're in doubt, you should take a step back and you should really look at the numbers and think about your end goal here. Remember, having the right plan up front before you sell your property and having that communication with your tenants is going to always make the home selling process smoother. So step 4, prepare the property for sale. Now that you've decided whether you're going to sell it with tenants in place or you're going to sell it vacant, let's talk about getting the property actually ready to sell. This is where you're going to make the house shine, and you're going to try to do it without spending more money than you need to. Over the years, I've learned exactly where to focus to get the biggest impact without actually breaking the bank. So if tenants are still in the property, here is what we're gonna do. Selling a tenant-occupied property takes a little bit of finesse, but it is totally doable. The key here is working with your tenants and not against them. So first, you want to set expectations early. Have an honest conversation about the importance of keeping the property presentable during showings. If needed, try to offer that small incentive like a cleaning service or a slight rent reduction to make things easier on them. And I've actually done this several times. I've offered them money to clean up the property or paid for a cleaner myself. And it's really amazing how a little goodwill can go a long way. The next thing that you want to do is you want to focus on the basics. So ask the tenant to keep the common areas tidy, take out the trash, and try to minimize as much clutter as they can. You're not asking them for a full makeover here. You're just asking them to clean up enough so the buyer has a clear picture of the space. And here's a pro tip. Schedule showings during times that are least disruptive, like ideally when the tenants are at work. And if you can, try to bundle showings together if possible so you're not constantly inconveniencing your tenants. One thing that I always tell landlords is that if you do not respect your tenants' time and space, it can backfire on you. I have seen properties where tenants feel like they were not being treated properly and they felt like they were not being respected. And when it actually came to looking at that property at the end of closing, they left the property in a horrible condition. So this is something you definitely do not want. Now, if you're gonna sell the property while it's vacant, then you wanna make sure the property is fully empty, and the more control that you have over the property, the better. So this is really your chance to make a killer impression while the property is vacant and you have full control over what's happening. Start with the basics. So start with cleaning, small repairs like scuffed walls, squeaky doors, maybe leaking faucets. And if you could do a fresh coat of light paint like gray or off-white, something neutral, that's going to instantly brighten up the space and make it feel more modern, most especially if it's an older apartment. Next, you could potentially consider some staging, if it's worth it. And most especially if you are targeting that owner occupant buyer. So you do not need to stage every room. If it's like 5, 6, 7 units, you could stage 1 unit only. You could stage the kitchen, maybe the bedroom, a few pieces of furniture, decor is really going to help buyers imagine themselves living there. That emotional connection can really translate to a higher offer. And do not forget about curb appeal. The exterior of the house is always the first thing that buyers see, especially online. So make sure that it's inviting. You should trim the hedges, mow the lawn, maybe throw some fresh mulch on there or put some flowers in the yard. And if the mailboxes are old or the front doors are old, consider painting them or replacing them. Little small investments can make a huge difference. You really want to try to highlight the property's potential, whether you're selling it vacant or occupied. Your job here is to make sure that buyers see the potential in the property. If you're selling to investors, then you want to actually emphasize on that rental income, low maintenance features, and any updates that you've already done. That way they know they're coming into a reduced workload. And if you're selling it to that owner occupant buyer, you want to make sure that it's clean and it looks good so they can fall in love with the space. And here is another pro tip. One thing that I've seen homeowners mistake is that they pour so much money into upgrades that don't actually move the needle. So if you can stick to cost-effective improvements that pack a punch, like paint, cleaning, scrubbing the floors, and small updates, maybe new appliances, this is going to really give you the best return for that rental property. If you're feeling overwhelmed, remember you don't need perfection. The goal is to present the property in the best light, not to make it look like a model home. Focus on things that matter most, and remember that repping your property may take a little bit of time and effort, but it is going to be one of the smartest investments that you can make for yourself. Step 5, market strategically. So now that the property is ready to go, it's time to really get into the marketing side of this. This is where you want to show off what makes your property unique and what makes it appealing versus other properties. And no matter whether you're selling to an investor or a homeowner occupant, this is going to be important. Over the years, I've learned that great marketing isn't just about making empty promises. It's really trying to tell the right story to the right buyer. So let's break it down. Marketing to investors. So if you're going to be targeting investors, they don't actually care about decorative pillows or how cozy the living room feels. They're focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is the numbers. And here's how you can speak their language. So you want to try to focus on highlighting that monthly rental income. Investors love properties with cash flow. Show them how much income the property generates and back it up with rent rolls, lease agreements, and payment histories. If tenants are reliable, make sure that that's crystal clear in your marketing materials and when you have the property listed. You want to emphasize on that tenant stability. Long-term tenants with a good track record are a huge selling point. Stability means less turnover, fewer headaches, and a steady income stream. These are things that every single investor values. You want to focus on low maintenance features. So if you've done updates like replacing the roof, upgrading the HVAC systems, or installing durable flooring, make sure to highlight those things. Anything that reduces the maintenance cost for an investor is going to be a win. And if you can, include a sample financial breakdown in your listing. Gross rental income, annual expenses, and potential ROI. Investors are super busy, so if you can make this easier for them to evaluate the property, the faster they're going to be able to close on your house. Now let's talk about marketing to homeowners. If you're selling to an owner-occupier, it's a completely different ballgame. Homeowners are looking for an emotional connection and they want to imagine themselves living in the property, and we kind of all know that. So if you can stage the property or use AI renderings. If the property is vacant, consider staging it to highlight its potential, even again, if that's just a few rooms. And if the property isn't really stage worthy or the budget isn't there, digital renderings can actually help the space look visual or the space look a little bit more complete when it's furnished. So you can consider AI renderings. Okay, moving on. So let's showcase flexibility. So if you're marketing a tenant-occupied property to homeowners, make sure that the listing addresses their concern. Mention that when the lease ends or how they're going to transition the property to suit their needs. It's about making sure that the situation works for them and they are going to get the property vacant. And another really good thing to consider is to use high quality photos and videos. And in my opinion, this is really a non-negotiable. Professional photos and videos can elevate your listings tremendously, especially when paired with the well-written description that highlights the home's best features. If the property has great natural light, spacious rooms, or great curb appeal, make sure that that shines in every single photo that you put up. Now, here are some pro tips for marketing. You want to play to the property's strengths. Whether that's location or if it's condition or maybe even the income potential, focus on what actually makes this specific property valuable. So is it near a good school district? Is it in a growing job market? Does it have low property taxes or high rental demand? Whatever asset is there, make sure that your buyer is going to see that. And it's a really good idea to know your buyer pool. Are you in a market where investors dominate, or are there a lot of families looking to move into that area and buy a home there? Or try to tailor your listing to that audience. So think, investors want data, families want heart. Try to leverage today's online platforms. Everyone is using online platforms to look for properties like Zillow, Redfin, and even Facebook Marketplace. So make sure that you do not underestimate social media. It is such a powerful place for targeting local buyers and investors. And try to highlight the possibilities. If the property needs work, frame it as an opportunity. Phrases like value add or potential or customized to your taste can turn this into a selling point. Remember, marketing is your first impression for the property. Think of your listing as a handshake. It's the first chance to show buyers why your property is worth their time. By tailoring your approach to your audience and focusing on the features that matter, you're going to attract the right buyers and set yourself up for success. Great marketing doesn't just sell a house, it tells a story. And when you tell the right story, buyers are going to see the value, whether they're looking for a home for their next investment or they're looking for a property to live in. All right, moving on to step 6, navigating offers and closing the deal. Now we're at the point where the rubber meets the road, handling offers and closing the deal. This is where all of your hard work pays off, but it's also where things can get tricky if you don't approach it with the right strategy and with a level head. I've been in this game for years, and trust me, this is all about balancing your excitement with clear thinking. Let me actually walk you through it. Evaluating offers. So when the offers start to roll in, it is so easy to focus on the price alone, but price is not everything when it comes to a transaction. Look beyond the numbers. Sure, a high offer looks great on paper, but what are the terms to that offer? If it's tied to contingencies like requiring the property to be vacant or demanding repairs, that can slow down the process or even jeopardize the deal entirely. And I've learned that sometimes a slightly lower cash offer with absolutely no strings attached can end up being the smarter move. There's fewer headaches and there's often a faster closing. And you want to understand your buyer's intentions. This is a big one. Is the buyer an investor or someone who's planning to live in the house? Investors are usually fine with tenants staying in place, but owner-occupants will probably want the house vacant. If you haven't already worked out a move-out plan with your tenants, this could delay escrow and it can create unnecessary stress. So always confirm the buyer's expectations about the tenants up front, making sure that there are going to be no surprises later on. Let's talk about counteroffers. Don't be afraid to negotiate, whether it's about price, timeline, or tenant arrangements. Counteroffers are a standard part of the process. Stand firm on what works for you, but also try to be realistic about what's really achievable. It's all about trying to find that sweet spot for you and the buyer. And working with tenants during closing can be also a tricky process to navigate. And if you're selling it with the tenants in place, this is where that communication that we were talking about earlier is going to actually play off. So when it comes to coordinating inspections, once that deal is under contract, buyers will likely want inspections or potentially an appraisal. So do try to give your tenants plenty of notice and remind them about any agreements that you've made regarding that access. A little courtesy is going to go a long way in trying to keep things smooth. Discuss the transition plan. So with the buyers keeping the tenants, then make sure that you can help them make a seamless transition. So try to provide the buyer and the new owner with lease agreements, payment histories, any contact information for that tenant or maybe maintenance people. This not only shows that you're professional, but it also is going to reassure that your tenants that they're in good hands as well as the buyer. So let's talk about navigating challenges during closing. Let's get real. Closing is not always a smooth sailing process, and there's most likely to be bumps ahead. So let's talk about tenant move out delays. If the property is required to be vacant and the tenants haven't moved out yet, it's obviously going to throw a wrench in the timeline. So this is why I always start by going ahead and talking to them about tenant relocation conversations with them. So whether you're going to talk about cash for keys, or if it's helping with the moving costs, or making sure you know that they're moving to another place, try to get that all sorted out before you get too deep into escrow. And of course, there are going to be unforeseen repairs that turn up, and you might want to renegotiate your price or agree to make these repairs before you sell. Keeping a little bit of flexibility in your budget or your price of expectations can save you a lot of stress. Then there's financing issues. If the buyer is relying on financing and their loan falls through, this could definitely mean that your entire deal is going to fall through. So that's why cash offers are typically the gold standard, because they can minimize risk and keep things moving forward. And when you've navigated offers and tackled all of the challenges, it's time to finally bring it home. Finalize tenant arrangements. If the tenants are staying, then make introductions to the new owner and ensure that the transfer and the security deposits and the lease agreement is handled properly. A smooth handoff builds goodwill for everyone involved in the transaction. Try to confirm all of the documents, work closely with your escrow officer or your attorney to make sure everything is in order, especially paperwork related to tenant arrangements or outstanding issues with the property, like maintenance requests or back payments. And selling a tenant-occupied property isn't always easy, but when you close the deal, it's proof of the effort and strategy you put in, and it's a win, honestly, worth celebrating. Here's the piece of wisdom that I've picked up over the years. Relationships are everything. The way that you interact with your tenants, your buyers, your realtor, that can make or break the entire deal. Respect, professionalism, and clear communication can smooth out so many potential bumps. And when you approach the process with this mindset, you're not just closing a sale, you're building that trust that can open doors down the road. Selling a tenant-occupied home takes patience, planning, and again, a little bit of finesse, but when it's done right, it's incredibly rewarding. So let's wrap this video up. Selling a tenant-occupied house may feel overwhelming at first, but with the right plan, clear communication with your tenants, and a little bit of patience, it's actually quite manageable. And whether you're navigating Tennessee tenant laws, deciding whether to sell your property vacant or tenant-occupied, or even marketing the property, I hope you found this video helpful. And if you're thinking about selling a tenant-occupied house and you're looking for a cash offer, we would love to help you. Just give us a call. Our information will be below in the description. And if you're looking for more videos on how to sell your house fast, click this playlist here. We're working on several more videos that'll be coming out this month, giving you insider tips and tricks from us as home buyers over the last several years. Thank you so much for watching.